Hi, my name is Kristen Philhauer. I'm the Associate Dean at the UW-Whitewater Rock County campus. I am really happy to be here with you and talk a little bit more about the financial aid process, the form itself, what it all means, and next steps. So I look forward to sharing more with you in the next half hour or so, and then also want to let you know that if you do have questions, I will be putting my phone number at the end of the session. So if you do have questions, you can get in touch with me and I'd be happy to help. There are really three things that we're going to be discussing today. Financial aid, what it is and how to get it, and to understand that every single student is eligible for aid regardless of income. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Fafsa, which is the free application for federal student aid. This is the form that you're going to complete in order to determine how much you are eligible for. And then any special circumstances that may come up. We have quite a few, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail as we go along. So there are really two important numbers that go into the entire financial aid process and determining need. The first number that we're going to talk about is something called the cost of attendance. And the cost of attendance, depending on the college you go to, is determined by different organizational groups. So within the UW system, that cost is determined by the Board of Regents. If you're at a private institution, it's usually a board of trustees. But the main idea is that the cost of attendance covers both direct cost and indirect costs. So you can see on this slide here a list of different types of costs that help us come up with that overall cost of attendance. And this can vary widely from college to college. So if you go on to Harvard's website and type in cost of attendance, they're still going to take all of these things you see on the slide into consideration. However, the cost of those things are going to be much more than they are, say, at the Whitewater or Rock County campus. So the direct costs include tuition, housing, and a meal plan, just to name a few. Indirect costs are things like transportation, educational supplies. If students need a laptop in order to be a successful college student, that helps the institution determine, okay, this student, it is going to cost them X number of dollars per year to attend our campus. The next really important number in the process is something called the expected family contribution, or what we refer to as the EFC. So the whole reason that you fill out the Fafsa is to determine this expected family contribution. How much can your household contribute to your student's education? Now, unlike the cost of attendance that we just talked about, which varies from college to college, the expected family contribution stays the same regardless of the school that your student is going to. So again, the EFC, or expected family contribution, is determined once you complete the Fafsa. So let's take a look. These are 2019-2020 costs of attendance by school. So if you remember a couple of slides back, we talked about that cost of attendance that varies from college to college. And so we've put up just a general list here for you to review. If we're looking, and I'll use Whitewater because that's where I'm from and what I'm most familiar with. If you are living at home, your cost of attendance for one academic year is $12,880. That's ballpark. That gets divided in half by semester. So it'd be about $6,440 per year, or per semester, excuse me, for a student to attend if they're living at home. If they're living on campus, the total cost is just about $19,000, and that again gets divided in half per semester. And so the cost of attendance is listed out here, and then you complete the Fafsa to determine how much it is that your household can contribute toward this amount, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. At UW-Whitewater, if your student is planning to attend a campus like the Rock campus, that living at home number and living on campus will be a little bit less because our tuition is a little bit less. So we'll talk more about that as we go, but you get the general idea here. If you're looking at a Northwestern university, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. The living at home cost is listed here. The living on campus cost is listed right next to it. Now, we will talk a little bit more, even those costs, seem much greater. Sometimes private institutions have the ability to cover some of those costs in other ways, and we'll talk about that as we go. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we determine how much your student is eligible for. We've already talked about these two really important numbers, the cost of attendance, which is based on the school your student attends, and the expected family contribution, which is figured out by the Fafsa. So in order to figure out how much aid your student is eligible for, you take the cost of attendance at whatever school they're planning to attend, and you subtract the expected family contribution that was determined when you filled out the Fafsa. That will equal the amount of financial aid that your student is eligible for. So for example purposes, let's just say that your cost of attendance is $12,000, and that after filling out the Fafsa, the EFC is determined to be $2,000. So you have the $12,000 cost of attendance, you subtract the amount of expected family contribution, and that leaves you with a need of $10,000. That need will get divided in half by semester, and students would then be eligible for $5,000 a semester in financial aid based on that particular scenario. So you always take the cost of attendance, subtract the EFC. This slide is just giving you some examples of need based on various school costs. I won't go into this a lot, but you can see the cost of attendance at each one of these schools minus the expected family contribution. You can see that stays the same across the board, and what that results in need, what those results of need will be. Okay, so now that you've had the opportunity to figure out how much aid your student is eligible for, let's talk a little bit about the types of financial aid. So grants is the good money, right? That's things that you don't ever have to pay back. Loans are amounts of money that the student takes out and pays back on. Students can also be eligible for work study, where they work on campus and earn an hourly rate. There are scholarships that are available to students, and then outside benefits such as veterans, tuition assistance, DVR. We're going to talk about all of these in a little bit more detail. So let's start with grants. This is money that does not have to be paid back. Pell Grant is one of the most common grants, and students are eligible for Pell if their expected family contribution is less than $5,486. And so it's on a sliding scale, and the largest federal grant available is $6,095 a year. You divide that in half by 2 by each semester. And that is if you have an EFC of 0. If you have an EFC of $5,486, you will get a $652 Pell Grant, and that will be divided in half by semester. There's also the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. You can see the listing here at Whitewater, what the maximum is. and you must be eligible for Pell in order to get that money. I'm going to talk a little bit more about SEOP, that particular grant, because that has a smaller pool of dollars in it, and so students need to apply for it sooner in order to get it. So let me back up and just mention that when you fill out the FAFSA, you are helping to determine if you're eligible for any of these monies. The sooner you fill out your FAFSA closer to October 1st, the more likely that you'll be able to get some of these smaller pots of money, like Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. If your student resides in Wisconsin, they're also eligible for the Wisconsin grant. And the student grant is going to vary by school, but it's still a pretty sizable amount of aid. And again, that's just from completing the FAFSA. One of the other types of aid that your student might be eligible for based on filling out their FAFSA is loans, and this is money that has to be paid back. Both the subsidized and unsubsidized loans are government loans. The subsidized is the better of the two, and it is need-based. The government pays the interest as long as the student's enrolled at least half-time. Unsubsidized loan, there is interest charged while the student is in school. Now, we won't know the percentage rate of that will accrue on that interest for a bit yet, but 2 years ago that was at 5.05%, which is lower than you'd be paying if you were seeking out another loan. The other benefit of both the subsidized and unsubsidized loan is that students don't begin paying these back until 6 months after they finish school or stop out. Both of these loans are in the student's name, and if they want to get them, they apply and they get them, or they accept and they get them. They do not need to complete an application, and they don't need to do a credit check. They just need to say they want them, and they will get those loans. The Parent Plus loan is just for parents of dependent students. You can see the interest rate is a little bit higher on those. If a Parents Plus loan application is denied, because there is a credit check and a loan application for these dollars, the students are going to be eligible for additional subsidized loan. And so please make note of that. If you're thinking that's the only way to make up that gap and you're not sure that you or a parent is going to be eligible for that, if the student is denied and they let the financial aid office know the student is eligible for additional unsubsidized loan. And then there are private and alternative loans, which would be something maybe you'd get through your bank. The student would be the borrower, and they would most likely need a co-signer, and they have to be eligible through credit check of some sort in most cases. So those are something to consider. The direct loan slide that I'm showing you is the annual maximums for both combined subsidized and unsubsidized. So as a freshman, a student who is a dependent student is eligible for $5,500 in loans, and as an independent student, $9,500 in loans. And you can see the list here. That information continues to go up, or I'm sorry, not the information, but the dollar amounts continue to go up as the student is in school, and you can see the career maximums listed here. So one of the other really nice benefits of applying for financial aid through the FAFSA is to determine if the student is eligible for work study. Work study is based on need and overall financial aid picture. Funds run out for this pretty quickly at the Whitewater campus at least, and I'm sure that's pretty similar across the board at most institutions. The funds are earned by a rate of pay and hours worked, and jobs are usually on campus. So a student might be working in, say, the Career and Leadership Development Office, and maybe they're interested. We try to fit jobs with things that the student might be interested in, and they earn an hourly rate just like if they were working off campus somewhere. The really big benefit of work study is that we do know that students who take work-study positions are connected in some way to the campus, which ultimately translates into retention and more likely to earn degree. So it's a wonderful opportunity for students to get connected, to meet other people on campus, navigate the system, and also make a little bit of extra money. So scholarships is the other big place where students can be made aware of financial aid opportunities. Scholarships are money that does not have to be paid back, and they are awarded on things like merit, skill, or any unique characteristic. And I say this because we know that a lot of students don't think that they're going to be eligible for scholarships, so they just don't apply. Which we know, as I've been doing this a very long time, we know that there are scholarships out there for all kinds of students. I strongly encourage you to apply for scholarships, have your student apply for scholarships. I know that your local school counselor office has a lot more information on accessing those scholarships that are local. But in addition to applying to the Fafsa, there are foundations and businesses and charitable organizations that are out there and want to help your students. Again, your school counselor office is going to have a long list of those. I would also encourage parents to ask their employers, or if they're involved in outside organizations. I've mentioned this before in presentations. My husband for many years was involved in a fishing club, and every year they gave out a college scholarship to any member's student going on to school. So you never know, and I would encourage you to think about the kinds of things you're involved in and see if scholarships are available. There are also some national websites to apply for national scholarships, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Deadlines and application procedures are going to vary widely, but I strongly encourage your student to look and see what's out there. The one example we always give is, let's say it takes an hour to fill out an application for a scholarship and your student gets $500. There's not a lot of places where you're going to make $500 an hour. So strongly encourage the scholarship application process. So now that we've told you about all the different kinds of aid that's available for your students once they fill out the FAFSA, let's talk a little bit about how you start the process of completing that document. So the very first thing that you're going to need is to get a federal student aid ID. So parents of dependent students, one parent is going to need to get an FSA ID. And each student that you have in college will need to get their own FSA ID. The website here is where you would go to find that. And the benefit of this, if a parent has been a college student themselves, and let's say they already have an ID and password, they don't need to get a new one as a parent. This is a username and password that you create. It replaces the old PIN number. Some of you may remember that. And it requires less input, and it also provides more security. So it's going to be really important that both the student and the parent complete this process before completing the form. And this is just the screen that helps you identify the kinds of things you're going to need in order to get that FSA ID and password. So now that you've got your ID and password, you're ready to complete the FAFSA. The FAFSA opens October 1st of every year, and they collect a variety of information to calculate that student's EFC number. For the 21-22 school year, you will be using the 2019 federal income tax return. In addition to that, you're able to import your financial income directly from the IRS database, which is a nice option because it requires less of you inputting information and more of it having input directly from the IRS database. So you might wonder, how do I know if my student is dependent or independent? The list here gives you examples of how a student would ever be considered an independent student. We get a lot of questions about this. One of the most common is, well, when my student turns 18 and they're done with high school, they might be living on their own, working their own job. Unless they meet any of the requirements listed here, they are still considered dependent on their students in terms of the eyes of financial aid. There are some other things that have come up, and there is an independent dependent appeal process for students that may be determined independent by things that are not listed here. The kinds of things might be student was in foster care, is currently has no relationship with parents, and so they would be really unique, and those are the kinds of things you can give your financial aid office a call about, and they can help you walk through that appeal process. But if your student doesn't meet any of these top 6 qualifications, they would be considered dependent. Okay, so let's talk about the form. The Fafsa application can be found online. The one thing I do want to mention is that if you are going on to Google and you just type in Fafsa, you will get hundreds of possible, we can help you with your Fafsa. The one thing I want to note is that if you are ever being asked to pay for help with this application, you are on the wrong site. You should never ever have to pay for this. This is a free application for federal student aid. And this is what the main site will look like. When you log into the Fafsa using your Fsa Id, you're going to click on I am the student. And then you will enter your Fsa email or ID and password. You will need to accept the disclaimer listed here. And we don't quite have the 21-22 application available yet. So you're still seeing the 1920. There's also the 2021 application that's for students that are enrolled in college this year. But you'll see the 21-22 application once you log in beginning October 1st. I encourage you to create a save key. This is just in case you start the process and then you get interrupted and have to take a pause and go back in later. So this will take you right back to where you left off, and you're required to complete this step. You'll start working through the Fafsa, and you will have the ability to retrieve tax data directly from the IRS. This really does minimize errors, and schools will be able to see the information much more quickly. You can see here that we cannot retrieve data, or the Fafsa can't retrieve data from people who are married and filed separately or a victim of identity theft. So please make note of that. After you've entered in your student demographic information, your school selection, dependency status, and parent demographics, you're going to get asked for additional financial aid information. This is where you're going to leave the Fafsa and proceed to the IRS site. You will then be asked to enter the information for your 2019 federal income tax return. I realize this form says 2017, but again, it's not the most recent Fafsa. That comes out October 1st. And you want to make sure that you're using the information exactly like you used it on your, when you completed your tax return. That includes street address. You want to double check that to make sure you have it listed exactly the same. You'll complete this and then submit to pull that information. So once you've completed that process, you're going to see under financial information, instead of having to add in your parents' income tax, it's going to all be transferred over from the IRS. So I just wanted to show you what that'll look like when it's completed. And then here's just an example of some of the other financial questions that you're going to be asked about parents. The student will also be asked these same questions, but just again want to make you aware of the kinds of things you'll be asked. And then here is a list. Once you get all done, you're not quite done yet because you've got to sign and submit. But you will get a list of all of the questions you've been asked and all of the answers. You may just want to look through that to make sure that everything looks okay. The social security number, the birth date, all of those are going to be really important. So just do a quick edit of that. And then both a parent and you are going to need to sign this form. Unless you're an independent student, then you will be the only person signing that. I believe the 2020 or the FAFSA that's coming out this year for 21-22 academic year is going to look a little bit different. I believe that you'll be able to sign some of that at the beginning. So once you've signed in, you don't need to do it again to actually provide that signature. But just be aware, as we talked about a couple slides ago, you're going to want to complete that Fsa Id for both a parent and a student so that you can sign at some point. Okay, and then just the next step, you're going to want to read before signing and make sure that you understand, and go ahead and both parent and student will have to complete this step. And then the student will need to sign here. Then you will see that your FAFSA was successfully submitted to federal student aid. I would definitely recommend making a copy of this and keeping a folder with all of the financial aid and scholarship information. It'll tell you the time and date that it was submitted and then what's going to happen next. This information will electronically get submitted to the schools that you have listed on the form. There is going to be a spot where you list each school you're planning on attending, and you can list up to 10 schools. I would strongly encourage you to list some backups. And you know, again, if you list 10 schools and you decide on your first choice, nothing bad happens by having those other 10 schools listed. But if you don't have any other schools listed and you decide not to go to your first choice, you've got to go back in and add those other schools, which can delay your ability to get aid and maybe not be eligible for some of the better money if that's run out by that time. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I did want to just mention that this is walking through another part of the form. We just talked about financial information, but this goes into what the student's going to need to have. So in the FAFSA, there's a big chunk of information about parents or parent, and then there's another section on student demographics. This is for dependent students. If your student is, if you or you have a student who is independent, they will only see the student information, but you can see the first step is a lot of demographics. And then you're going to go ahead and enter information about parents' marital status, parent social security number, and if your parents are married, you can fill out this completely. You only need one parent to do the Fsa Id completion. Okay, so I mentioned earlier other places you can go to find scholarship opportunities, and this is a list of some. College Board and FastWeb are probably the two that I am most familiar with. These are national scholarships. So we talked about completing the FAFSA. And when you complete the FAFSA, most institutions across the country, especially private schools, will apply scholarships to your award or what the student is eligible for, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So that happens automatically with the filling out of the Fafsa. A lot of the higher educational institutions also have scholarships that you apply for separately, and you'll learn more about that as you become a student longer. Then there are scholarships that are available through your high school, and that's where you'll want to talk to your school counselor office to see what opportunities there are there, and I'm sure they're sending information out to you as you're a senior. Then finally, there are national scholarships, and so these are bigger scholarships. Generally, the amount is much larger. You're also competing against students across the United States. But I still recommend, like I said, if you get really good at this and you're completing an application, generally you can continue to use that same application and tweak it for the scholarships you apply for. So with these, you log in, you fill out a rather large application, and then they will send you scholarships that they think you're eligible for based on the information you put on the application. In addition to that, there are other government resources for scholarships that are listed here, and you may have affiliation with some of those, so I'd encourage you to ask parents or talk with them about what some of those might be. Okay, so you submitted your FAFSA. Now what happens? Well, you're basically waiting. Most schools are going to match up your financial aid information with your application. So you're really going to have to apply to most schools in order to get the award letter. And the award letter is going to tell you, here is what we found on the FAFSA, and here is the aid that we're going to give to you, the student, and here are the forms in which that aid will come from. You are going to want to make sure when you apply to those schools that you're checking your email from that college on a regular basis, because the processing time with each school is going to vary. The larger, more competitive schools are going to want you to fill out the application, the FAFSA application, as close to October 1st as possible. And then they'll start awarding aid early in the year, so January, February. As we get down into some of the more maybe not as competitive schools, that time in processing might be February, March for the next academic year. But the idea is to be able to, if you're applying to more than one school, be able to check what each of those schools are giving you to see what might be the best deal. So you might be thinking, well, I understand that I have to use my 2019 tax return to complete the FAFSA, but a lot's happened or changed since 2019. And so these are what we call special circumstances, They are things that can't be reported on the FAFSA, but may make a difference in how much aid your student is eligible for. I'm going to strongly encourage that if this is the case, that you contact the financial aid office at each college for a review of your particular situation. And listed below are some of the things that may require that special condition. Change in employment status, any kind of medical expenses, marital status, loss of benefits like child support. There might be others that aren't listed here, and I've been working through and with financial aid for about 18 years, and I've seen really a whole host of reasons. So if you're not sure, I strongly encourage you to reach out to that financial aid office and talk with a specialist. So this next slide are important dates, primarily for UW-Whitewater. And I mentioned this just a little bit ago, that the more competitive school you or your student plan on attending, the sooner you want to complete this process. Some of the more competitive schools want those students to be choosing them, and they want students to make a determination on whether or not they're coming there early so they continue to go back to their pool and pull in additional students. So, and a lot of times it has to do with scholarship money that's available as well. So this is for Whitewater particularly. UW-Whitewater, Rock County, that priority date is going to be the same. However, the one thing I want to make really clear is if your student, regardless of where they go to school, does not apply by January 1st, it does not mean that the student still can't get aid in all the forms we talked about. It just means that they may, if they would have been eligible for, lose out on some scholarships or some special type of funding. But again, the priority date does not mean you're not going to get aid if you apply after that. In fact, it is now almost the end of September, and we have students filling out their FAFSAs right now for this fall. So I want to be really, really clear about that. If you haven't filled it out and say it's August and your student decides to go to school, you still can fill out the FAFSA. So it's really been a pleasure to be here with you. I wish you the best of luck with this. And I know I've overgeneralized a lot of information in this slide. What I do want to let you know is that if you have questions or concerns or you get stuck in filling out the form, you can certainly give me a call. My number is 608-898-5040. And again, my name is Kristen Philhauer. I wish you all the best of luck with this, and hopefully we've made it a little bit easier to complete this process. But again, like I said, if you have questions, please give me a call. Thank you so much.